Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Joining us today is Dr. Chris Keefer, Canadian emergency physician, host of the Decouple Podcast, and president of Canadians for Nuclear Energy. So, why are we interviewing an emergency physician on a podcast centered around the power industry? Through his nuclear advocacy, Chris spearheaded the turnaround of Canada's nuclear energy by engaging with the political class and bringing awareness to their constituents through public discourse, resulting in the life extension of current nuclear generation capacity through leveraging green finance mechanisms. His podcast, the Decouple Podcast, touches on all facets of power, including nuclear, oil, a brief intro to EVs, the grid, and much more. As we can see, Chris is definitely no stranger to the power space. Chris interviews some of the brightest minds in the nuclear and other power-related spaces on his podcast in an informative and entertaining manner. While power generation is one aspect, there is also a medical aspect as well. Canada's CANDU reactors also produce an enormous amount of medical isotopes, which are used for both cancer therapy and for the sterilization of medical devices. Chris, many thanks for taking the time to sit down with us for a bit and tell your story. Can you tell our audience a little bit more about yourself?
Hey, Micah, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm usually on the other side of the microphone hosting, as you mentioned, on the Decouple Podcast, so it's always great to sit in the guest seat for a while. That's a pretty good go of things. I've got an interesting backstory, and it goes all the way back to to my late childhood, I'll call it. Really, what I mean there is my late adolescence. I've done a lot of weird things over my life. I sort of cut out of university after a semester and ended up working as a whitewater canoe guide and then hunting guide and horse wrangler, never having ridden a horse or hunted before in my life. Ended up, getting my act together and going back to school and actually had to go back to high school for a while because I didn't do any hard courses in high school growing up. So I went back and crammed some calculus and chemistry and physics so I could take a stab at medicine. It was a real long shot, but I managed to pull that one off. And when I finished medical school, I started an intentional farming community. And as is the case with 98% of those sort of intentional weirdo hippie communes, that thing burned out in about 2 years, which is spot on in terms of the stats there. So I've kind of lived this, the hunt guiding thing in the Yukon. I mean, that was really sort of some hunter-gatherer level stuff. I went through my agricultural revolution, and I lived a lot of sort of kind of romantic ideas. But we evolved technologically into some agriculture. It's pretty simple stuff, to be honest, market garden and a little bit of hay crop and that kind of stuff. And then, I've ended up doing some humanitarian activism along the way with medicine. Been to some interesting places. Actually was on a medical mission in Gaza, of all places. That would have been 11 years ago, wow. Teaching Palestinian medics advanced cardiac life support. So that was an interesting little dodge along the way. And again, I'm planting too many seeds here because we could probably dive into this stuff, and it's got nothing to do with what you asked me to talk about today. But I wanted to give you that more fulsome background. So finally, my son was born. His birthday was a couple days ago. And when he was born, I started thinking about some other big issues. Whatever you grow up in, whatever you train in, if you're a lawyer, a doctor, if you're you're mentioning before you've been in the Navy, you're trained to think a certain way. And the kind of emergency medicine programming is around triage. So you identify what are the, most pressing problems and how do you mobilize, and this is probably a lot like the military, but how do you mobilize, available resources, personnel, time, to deal with those most critical issues. And when my son was born and started thinking into the future, I got a bit weirded out about climate change, started thinking about those issues a lot, became a big doomer, really boring at parties. I've always been boring at parties, to be honest, but my ex-wife said, shut up, stop talking about it, do something about it. She meant, sort the recycling better, take out the compost. And I somehow got the nuclear bug, and I've been at it ever since. So that's maybe a bit of a long-winded supplementary introduction, but there you have it, Micah.
No, it was fantastic, and it's amazing. And basically, you're an action-driven individual, and I can see it from the interaction. It's like, okay, I see something through my lived experiences. I need to go out and attack that thing and take it. And we're doing, something similar here through service and all that other good stuff. So kudos to you. And then of all things, so we ended up in nuclear. We're talking advancements. And by the way, I think the nuclear movement is something that needs to be global. It is definitely the OG, if you will, of green energy, with carbon emissions and everything else, and so reliable and stable. But kind of back to you, what even got you interested in the medical side? You're an ER trauma doc, correct? So how did you get that bug going from horse wrangling and farming and everything else to get into the doctor side of the house?
Yeah, to be clear, I do a bit of trauma. I'm not like a trauma team leader or anything like that. I work in a community emergency department, and we kind of handle whatever comes through the door, cradle to grave, literally. I mean, medicine, I went back to school for a while. I actually did it. Again, it's just going to kind of freak your audience members out some more. But I actually started university doing studio art. So I was doing like oil painting and sculpture and stuff like that, right? And I remember sitting in a painting class, and there were about 20 of us there. And we had, we do a lot of, actual hands-on stuff, but sometimes we do this kind of BS theoretical self-aggrandizing, which is, such a big part of art school is basically trying to grow an enormous ego and convince your future clients that they should spend lots of money on, your hobby. And we were going around in a circle, is painting still relevant in the age of photography? And, 5 people went before me, and basically all just found different ways to say the exact same thing and go on at great length. And I like walked out of that class and I'm like, I'm done with this arts degree. This is BS. I want a hands-on skill that I can put to service. I had a strong sense, and I think I still do, of sort of public service. I'm very was always interested in policy and in politics. If you're living in the right historical moment, and the ideas that you have are gelling with sort of what's crystallizing the political level, then I think you can make enormous impacts on a broad systemic level. And I've always been attracted to that. But if that's not the case, and it frequently is, good to have a hands-on skill. Imagine myself in an airplane, and is there a doc on board? I like being able to jump out of my seat and do that. Although it's only happened once in my I would say it's been a long career, but a lot of flights. Anyway, I wanted a hands-on skill. I was inspired by American physician, actually, Dr. Paul Farmer, who set up a bunch of health clinics in Haiti and came up with some really interesting ways to treat multi-drug resistant tuberculosis and other sort of diseases of poverty. So he was a big inspiration. Whenever I talk to kids about their career and what they want to be when they grow up, a lot of it is, don't think about the profession, find the individual who's inspiring. I want to be a teacher. There's so many boring teachers, but if you find that one teacher that's just absolutely blew your mind and you want to be like them. So that's kind of the approach I took. So that's why medicine. But I've always been kind of restless,
Doesn't show at all, Chris.
I've always had a side hustle, whether it's trying to run a hippie farming commune or what have you, or running a couple NGOs right now in a media company. So
it is fantastic, and you are a very, very busy man. I think we were scheduled to have one, and you were jetting off to Australia to go talk with the Prime Minister or something, or one of the agency ministers there to kind of advocate there on the nuclear front. And it's funny you mentioned that airplane scenario. I'm a private pilot. I'm dying for the chance. It's like, is there a pilot on board? I want to be that guy. We all think we can land the big ones. No one dang well we can. But no, fantastic. And that is an awesome backstory. And like I said, it's readily apparent you're driven to action in everything you do, and it's fantastic. And so what kind of drove that leap? So we covered the medical side. How the heck the nuclear, right? What was? Right. Were there any pivotal moments in life that kind of drove you to pursue that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's often sort of a conversion story around like the nuclear advocates, particularly people that get passionate about it, to write books or make podcasts. Often people start off anti-nuclear, and I'll confess my origin story is sort of on the political left. And you kind of, I think all of us, no matter where we come from in terms of our politics or a creed or a religion or whatever else, you get a sort of set of unexamined beliefs that you kind of, you get, a stack of books, essentially, metaphorically. And often those are unexamined beliefs. And so, one of my unexamined beliefs was that nuclear energy's got to be bad, right? It's going to kill the planet. It's really dangerous. I grew up in Ontario. We're 60% nuclear powered in terms of our electricity system. I was a bit uneasy about that. We used to drive, one of our highways goes pretty close to a nuclear power plant. I used to kind of hold my breath as I drove through there so I wouldn't get contaminated, which is, in retrospect, pretty damn funny. I'm like, I've always been a heterodox thinker. And I think one of my strengths has been being able to really challenge my ideas, and being open to saying I'm wrong.
Yes.
When the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir? That's a John Maynard Keynes quote I've always
Yes.
enjoyed.
Keynesian.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, obviously there was this tie-in with my son and the climate change thing. That's deepened over time. Like, it's more about what sustained my interest. Because if you can't tell from the backstory, there's a little bit of undiagnosed ADHD going on there. A lot of shifts in focus over the years, and this has sustained my focus and been my obsessive focus for about 5 years. And it's because it's just so damn interesting. I mean, what's at stake in terms of climate change, but also energy security, energy policy. I mean, energy is life, as other brilliant commentators say out there. We're in this constant battle against the forces of entropy. Everything's falling apart. And, just biologically, we're using energy to do the incredibly improbable thing of organizing a complex multicellular life form capable of freaking space travel. Right. But it's just everywhere around us, and it's invisible. And I think I'm becoming more and more fascinated with how the metaphorical sausage gets made, whether it's the literal sausage, and I've been out there on the farm and slaughtered some pigs and done some butchering and things like that, but also just really understanding this whole built world around us, this cell phone, which is serving as my webcam right now, all the rare earth minerals in there, how they're processed, where they're processed. That to me is fascinating. It's like the Wizard of Oz, pulling back the curtain, seeing how it's all done. Huge political overlays as well. So yeah, it's the more interesting question, I think, sort of what's sustained my interest. And I'm sure we'll get into that in some more detail.
Absolutely. And I think it's amazing too, coming from that 80s and 90s where we, it seems like there was that big push towards a nuclear scare. There was fallout, there was radiation. Of course, you had the, the big, the Chernobyl, event that kind of caused that. And a lot of people just kind of hang the hat on, this is what's going to happen in the space of nuclear, even like to the 3 Mile Island considerations. Like, there weren't any death causes, and it was a partial reactor. I can't remember the exact background on it at the time, but there was no death, and it was contained very quickly. And if you look at it from that aspect, and especially like the Fukushima as well, some random event, like a cyclone, tropical storm, or something like that, that's actually causing it. Relatively speaking, though, compared to what we thought growing up, nuclear is extremely safe. And I was like, on that big, on the party of what are we going to do with all this nuclear waste, not realizing that you can store massive amounts or reuse it in the various reactors, depending on the nuclear waste that's being used. And so I'm like you, I was kind of, grew up around that mindset of like, nuke's bad. And then through chatting with, just through self-study and things like that. And again, critical thinking and not in being willing to evaluate the whole macro perspective and kind of where the, the rare earth elements and things are coming from. Are we mining them in a responsible manner? And then looking at the safety record. To me, it just makes sense to go nuclear. And so I think we are seeing that pivot. Is that something that you kind of had to overcome in your efforts as well to kind of advocate for that in Canada?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, those are big hangups. And listen, I think like it's really important, especially when getting into lively debate. I think as we should in a healthy society and a healthy democracy, to engage with your opponents. Important to understand where they're coming from psychologically, and there are powerful drivers behind nuclear fear. I mean, we're still living under the threat of nuclear annihilation from the perspective of weapons. You're in the Navy. I'm not sure where exactly you served. I was just recorded a great episode with an expert about Admiral Hyman Rickover and his incredible contributions with naval nuclear propulsion. But I mean, in one of these ICBM equipped nuclear submarines, I mean, it's a world-ending machine. It's absolutely incredible what is enabled both through nuclear propulsion and nuclear weapons in terms of this is the ultimate sort of Prometheus is fire. In Pandora's box. So very, very understandable why people make that sort of category error and just want to take that whole technology and sort of sweep it away and wish it hadn't come into existence, stuff the genie back in the bottle. And obviously that's just not possible. Not at all. To lobotomize a whole lot of people in terms of, making nuclear weapons, not incredibly complicated technology. It's basically requires a state actor to do. The delivery is actually probably one of the bigger challenges.
The larger challenges, absolutely.
Incredible delivery costs a lot. I think that's why a lot of countries have kind of backed off in addition to diplomatic pressures. But yeah, in terms of trying to stuff the genie back in the bottle, ain't going to happen for a variety of reasons. Just basic geopolitics, but also, yeah, there's these associated technologies. And I'm really glad, and you mentioned the medical isotope side of the CANDU power reactor system. Canada is the number one source of medical isotopes in the world, used again, as you mentioned, both in medical diagnostics, medical therapeutics, as well as sterilization of medical instruments, but also food. People don't think about that, but I mean, we can dramatically improve food safety and extend shelf life. The greenies should be all over this. Yeah, you got to, shine a little gamma rays on the food. It doesn't turn it radioactive, but it kills off all the fungi and bacteria. But it means less food wastage.
Absolutely.
Food wastage, bad, right?
Very
20-30% of the food that we grow goes to waste. And that happens for a whole variety of reasons. But there's all sorts of, incredible applications. And so genie ain't going back in the bottle. And I think civilian nuclear power is one of those sort of miraculous attributes of the technology. Now, it ain't simple. It ain't easy. It takes your best and your brightest.
And it's very expensive too, which is, I think, another barrier to entry.
For sure. And there's ways to get the cost down, but this is not an easy technology. It kind of reminds me of JFK. Like, we do not go to the moon because it is easy. We go to the moon because it is hard. It's not a technology that's going to be available to every country in the world.
Right.
And it takes a significant investment of, human capital and capital itself and resources to get a nuclear program not just started, but started well. And so generally speaking, it happens for very pragmatic reasons. And in the case of, here in Ontario, why did we go nuclear? Well, it's because we didn't have coal. We didn't have gas.
Right.
We had a little bit of oil. We actually were one of the first places to drill oil wells, but dried up pretty quick. And so we were dependent on you guys south of the border to send us some coal up across the Great Lakes. Those Great Lakes used to freeze a lot more than they do now. Used to have unions that were a lot more rowdy than they are now in the coal mines, right? And it became just a basic energy security supply issue. We were industrializing like crazy after World War II, booming automotive sector. The auto pact with the U.S., we need a lot of power for those industries.
Absolutely.
And luckily, through some interesting quirks of history and World War II and kind of the UK, the British bomb program coming over, having a Manhattan Project North here in Canada, we had the scientific research resources to really start working on this nuclear power thing and ended up deploying 20 large CANDU reactors and just constructed in 27 years. Boom, 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 boom.
That is rapid. For folks that don't realize, that timeline is very impressive. Speaking to, I believe Vodal took the better part of 10 plus years, if I'm not mistaken, for 3 and 4. So
10 years would have been a good thing. Yeah, no, it was more than that. Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. So that's impressive.
And again, that's the product. Like, what I'm trying to say here is there's a big temptation, particularly amongst the climate concerned folks, to look for a swap in for fossil fuels. I mean, fossil fuels are awesome. And I mean that, awe-inspiring,
I
awesome.
Agree.
What they enable in terms of modern life, in terms of, from Elon's rockets to, air travel, buzzing down to Australia to do a speaking tour, to just having food on the table, the nitrogen fertilizers, that
plastics and everything else, where a petrochemical component to it. It's just, we'll never be able to get wholly rid of them, I don't think.
Exactly. So there's a desire for finding a swap in, right? Because fossil fuel's bad because of CO2 and air pollution. And listen, I think climate change, I'm in this sort of psychologically uncomfortable position of being someone who thinks climate change is a really big deal, right? But also being a real realist, an energy and climate realist, that I don't think we're going to move the needle too much on it because we need fossil fuels so badly. And also there's just so much inertia in the system.
Absolutely.
So anyway, I mean, there's a desire, I think, amongst some nuclear advocates to say, hey, it can be a swap in for everything and we can get rid of fossil fuels. I've come to a position, I think, that's a little more nuanced on that. Anyway, I'm rambling a little bit here, but I wanted to, I guess the main point I was trying to make is that, nuclear is got an incredibly high value proposition. It ain't easy. You don't do it unless you need to. You don't do it for fun. It's not a nice to have energy source. It's a need to have one. And when it's been needed, like Ontario, like France, Japan. What happened in Japan? Why did they get so many nukes? Well,
they don't have any rare earth minerals anywhere.
Well, they had enough coal. They had enough coal to do what's called the Meiji Restoration, right? Which was going from feudal, like shogunate Japan, to sinking, the entire frickin' Russian naval fleet.
Exactly.
In 50 years or something. It was less than 50 years, but they burned through their coal. And, so they're right now importing enormous amounts of natural gas and coal to power their country. And so it's a very smart energy security move. hey, we're a smart country. We've got good human resources, human capital. Let's do some nukes. And they were on their way to 50% nuclear power.
Absolutely.
When Fukushima happened. And again, for reasons that are very much caught up in the sort of psychological formation of that nation and being the only kind of victims of an atomic bombing, you kind of get why they overreacted just a little bit there.
If I were boots on ground over there, I would be very reluctant and hesitant as well, I would imagine. So from that aspect of it. And then kind of getting back to the Canadian. So you guys also, a lot of people don't realize Canada has a very, very large reserve of uranium, if I'm not mistaken, or uranium or deposits. Can you kind of tell us about that?
Yeah, so we don't have the largest deposits in the world, but we got the purest stuff.
Purest, that's what it was.
We got some high ore grades. So we've got mines that run 17%.
Wow.
Right. And I was just down in Australia. They're kind of 0.1%, I think, in Olympic Dam, which is their big mine. So the ore grades are absolutely insane. So it's a great resource to develop for us. There's pockets. I talk to prospectors up in the Athabasca Basin. They'll occasionally hit pockets that are 60% pure uranium ore.
Wow.
Which is bonkers. Which is
crazy. Right? And on something like that, and this is kind of a segue, if you will, but like whenever they're mining for that, is there a security component to that? Is it very regulated when they're doing the mining efforts up there? That's just unknown territory for me.
To be honest, yeah. I mean, I was almost got to the Olympic Dam site in Australia on this last visit. I got to do a few industrial tours, toured a big coal plant, which was really cool. So I've not yet toured a uranium mine. That being said, in terms of, I've toured a lot of nuclear facilities, nuclear power stations, and security is different around the world. It's interesting. I mean, in Canada, it's pretty intense. I mean, we've got sort of SWAT team type guys and 50 cal machine guns on armored vehicles. And I mean, they go and do competitions with the best in the world, and they place quite well. In the UK, that was hilarious. We went and visited one of these advanced gas reactors in the UK, and just like the UK police, right? I mean, they have a armed police, but the general kind of, I forget what they call them, the Bob or whatever, like the cop walking the street corners. All he's got is a billy club. He doesn't carry a gun. And it was like that at the nuclear plant. It was unreal.
Really?
I didn't see any guns. Yeah.
Wow.
He just went through a metal detector and, okay, come on in. Anyway, the nuclear mine, the uranium mines themselves, my understanding is there's not insane security because it's not, really
enriched or anything yet. It's
a risk at that point. Yeah. So I'm sure there's security in terms of, sending yellow cake here and there. But I won't comment much further because, to be honest, I'd be blowing smoke. I'm not.
No, I feel you on that one. Yeah. And then so kind of rehashing or touching back. So you chose this second calling in nuclear advocacy. Obviously, you're fighting the political machine in some side, both right and left, or whatever it may be, conservative, liberal, moderate, whatever. How did you navigate that? That is just fascinating to me. That one individual that was a ER trauma doc now has a passion for nuclear. And now you want to have impact, take action, make change. What did that journey look like? How did you even start making the advocacy move?
Right. Yeah, I mean, so in medicine, we're trained to think of something called upstream medicine. So obviously there's the patient in front of you and the illness that they're there with, but there's a story to that illness. Say it's a heart attack. It has to do with maybe an unhealthy lifestyle, a poor diet, smoking, air pollution. People don't think about that, but actually air pollution is a major driver of heart disease and stroke. And so, we're encouraged as doctors to think not just of the patient in front of us, but of the disease process. And could we intervene somewhere, farther down the line or earlier down the line to prevent things? And so that's why, we see actually with lawyers, I mean, everybody hates a lawyer, but often they do a lot of pro bono work, volunteerism. They represent, clients who are, have compelling reasons to, but not the resources to look after themselves. And so there's definitely a tradition of sort of physician advocacy. Often you can draw kind of less tangential line between, they're a doctor, they're arguing for this because it's medically related. Certainly you can make that argument with nuclear, both in terms of the medical isotopes, which is really direct, but also the air pollution thing. So we used to have a coal fleet. 25% of our power in Ontario came from that imported, mostly US coal. And for energy security reasons and for mostly air pollution rather than climate reasons, we made the call to phase that out. Nuclear is what contained that growth in coal, and nuclear is ultimately what gave us the oomph to get it completely off the grid. So in terms of making that leap, that's sort of one of the big sort of explanatory factors. In terms of the politics you're mentioning. Yeah, like I don't want to have an itty bitty impact. I want to have a big impact. Right. And so it's funny. I mean, we started this organization, Canadians for Nuclear Energy. literally, like, I'm not much good in the computer, but threw together some pamphlets, set up some tables illegally in the main sort of city town square in Toronto, and biggest city in the country. It was a joke, right? And mostly talking to your usual suspects, people that are kind of coming out of a fentanyl buzz, or schizophrenically preaching the word of the Lord or whatever else.
Right.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about new. Oh God, it was a little cringe. But somehow, again, within a year and a half, I'm talking with the premier, I'm talking with the Minister of Energy, Labor, and then federally, meaning the Prime Minister, a number of cabinet ministers. And it's because nuclear, as you noted, has become a real hot button issue recently.
Absolutely.
And it's happened for a variety of reasons. And climate's a big one. That sort of, brought it back into light as, hey, this is a technology that's actually, it can't replace all fossil fuel services, but it's a good swap in for something like coal. And then also, obviously, geopolitics. And as I mentioned, nuclear is a need to have, not nice to have technology.
Absolutely.
And Europe, went quite a ways in on nuclear after the OPEC crisis, because they actually burned a lot of oil for power generation. And they don't have, there's good coal deposits in Germany, for instance, but they're not blessed with copious endowments of fossil fuels. So there was a good energy hedge there to do nuclear. But, as in many places in the West, growth stagnated economically and particularly electricity load growth. For a whole variety of reasons, we decided it was really smart to offshore heavy and critical industry over to China. We got more efficient, like LED light bulbs, electric motors got 40-50% more efficient. Inverter compressors made, aircon and fridges more. So, our demand flattened out. We didn't need to keep adding things, and we could just cruise on this infrastructure built by our forefathers. And we got real lazy, and we got real arrogant, and we learned to code, and we financialized our economies. And then all of a sudden, reality hits home. Putin invades Ukraine, and it's a gas war. Turns off the pipes on the natural gas pipelines, right? And all of a sudden, Europe snapped back to its senses. And then that sort of reverberates through. And, we even saw that, the Henry Hub price went up to about $8 around that time after, I have to double check the facts on this, or the calcs on this, but I had a nuclear engineering prof tell me that at some points, U.S. natural gas has been cheaper than water for the equivalent.
It has, and it's they were actually. So I grew up in the O&G industry. My dad owned an exploration company, so geophysical thumpers, vibrators, finding the oil basically. And that was one of the natural byproducts that we got in the West Texas Basin out there. And you couldn't get rid of the LNG. They were actually paying to have it hauled off, so it was or flaring.
Or flare it.
And that was kind of the thing. So it was just a byproduct. And the fact that we've been able to turn that into a commodity that's usable and through the the gen sets that are being used. And I know it's very, very prevalent in the crypto mining space out in West Texas, where they're using a lot of that. And that's the reason. And kind of to the same tune of like the hydro in Sweden and things like that. It's dang near, free energy for the most part from that aspect of it. Yeah. And so it makes it very viable for those folks. And we're still seeing a good mix. And I know you're spun up and more attuned with the industry than I am, but LNG's kind of definitely offsetting all the coal, the coal here. We're shutting down coal, standing up some LNG. And then I've been following the DOE. I try to keep the macro perspective. Obviously it comes down to the supply chains and things that we talked about, and national security reasons and things like that. But the DOE just recently, as recently, or I'm starting to see more information or social media posts about it from the DOE, posting on the advances of nuclear and the movements we're trying to get nuclear. More brought into the fact that we're even the big data center players now that are, bringing new, or I think 3 Miles looking to come back online. And there's another one up on the East Coast that's looking to come back online, all tying into the industry 3.0 side of things with data centers. Those bad boys are hungry, ultimately driving our need for all this power in the first place. So
exactly. So nuclear's back, and it's been kind of roaring back, and it's at a kind of fever pitch right now. Unfortunately, we're in this sort of tale of two cities, best of times, worst of times. The hype is massive, and the actual ability to deliver is what's in question.
Yeah.
And we're not in a situation where, like Ontario was in the 70s, where we could bang out 20 nuclear reactors in 27 years. No, like we've hollowed out our industrial base, and we've lost the human factors, the human capacity. Like, again, as I said, nuclear takes your best and your brightest, your best project managers, your best craft laborers, and we are anemic on that front. So that's really worrisome. But getting back to the politics, because I love politics, I think they're fascinating. There's this joke, the left loves government but hates nuclear, and the right hates government but loves nuclear, and therefore nuclear doesn't go anywhere, right? Because you do need a little dose of government, right? Both
You
because
have
it's
to,
something
or it doesn't get
that's
off the
highly
ground, right?
regulated. It's like saying, hydroelectricity. I'll leave that up to the private sector. I mean, maybe micro hydro, but like if you're going to build the Hoover Dam, you might have private sector contractors involved in building it, but it's going to be government backed, right? This is a massive capital intensive project. You got to get billions of dollars of loans in place, and your ROI is not 5 years. I'm sorry, right? Mm-hmm. It's 10, 20.
It's 10. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so there needs to be some government involvement. And so we've been sort of caught in this impasse. Again, when it's a life or death, we need the energy, then governments will get their act together, industry will get its act together, and they'll deliver on nuclear, often very cost effectively, again, as we did in Ontario, as they did in France, or many other countries around the world. But that sort of political situation has changed in interesting ways. And it's as a result of something I'm calling, well, not just me, it's called the political realignment, right? And so I found this interesting avenue into being able to pressure all sides of the political spectrum towards nuclear, because there's truly something in nuclear for every political taste bud.
I would
right?
agree with you.
On the political right, it's kind of low cost energy, reliable energy secure energy that can power a growing economy. On the political left, it should be things like climate change. It should be things like high quality jobs, union jobs for workers. And the greenies, they should love the emissions free nature of it. But we haven't seen that sort of political consensus building around it for a variety of reasons. But because of some old hangups, right? I mean, on the political left, again, hate nuclear, love government. Why do they hate nuclear? Well, it's these unexamined beliefs that I used to share as well, kind of biases towards an aesthetic of small is beautiful, fears of contamination, etc. But again, what's gotten interesting is that, and this is going to take you on a little bit of a tangent and a leap here, but I promise it'll
I'm here for it.
Come into focus. So on the political left, for instance, aversion to nuclear energy. And I found a way that I could really wedge them and pressure them to come around to a sensible position on this. And the reason being is that the modern political left, it used to be 50, 100 years ago, the working class who were not gig economy workers in the service industry, they were people swinging hammers and, pulling wrenches in factories. They were organized a lot more in unions, and they would vote reliably for a left-wing party, whether that was the old school Democrats or the Labour Party in the UK or the New Democratic Party in Canada. And that was the pretty simplistic. You voted in your class interests, right? And the kind of educated elites and the very wealthy would vote for the conservative parties. That's kind of how it went. Well, that's really changed now. Like the new constituency of the Democrats, of the left-wing parties around the world, are now kind of this what we call professional managerial class, the educated elites, people that have been through university, people that shower before work, right? And those parties no longer represent the people who shower after work, meaning the people you get, engine oil on their hands and full torque and everything else like that. And so they still kind of assume they have that as their base, but they're becoming untethered. So skilled, private sector tradespeople, they are now political free agents. And they all of a sudden have a lot of political power because the right is going, hey, I think I could get these guys votes. I want to grow the economy. Oh, a growing economy is what gets infrastructure built, which is what gives these guys jobs. Okay, this is what's called this political realignment. And so the political left now is going, man, I really want to hold on to this, trusted electoral riding that I've held forever because it's a company town or an old mining town or a steel town or an auto town. And oh boy, that seat's not looking safe anymore. And so they have to make a choice. Okay, am I going to try and just represent my environmental kind of, I call them pseudo environmentalists, but my urban shattering class elites? Am I going to put the anti-nuclear flag up for them and alienate that base and that seat I really need in that riding in Canada here? Oshawa, it's a big auto manufacturing riding. We built the Pickering Nuclear Power Station instead of a coal plant to provide electricity for that power hungry industry, right? So there's a tie in there. And so it's interesting they hold an anti-nuclear event and I go, okay, well, whose side are you on here? And I reference that labor language. There's this Woody Guthrie song, whose side are you on, boys? Whose side are you on? And so it reverberates with the labor movement. And, that little kind of dying reflex of these left-wing parties kind of goes, oh, shit, yeah, we're supposed to represent working people.
Right.
So it's a way to diffuse in any case and hopefully steer them pro-nuclear at some point, but at least punish them for being anti-nuclear. And
That
then
makes a lot of sense, actually. So
on the
you're
political right,
basically identifying those weak parts within the constituency that is going to be very, very important to them winning re-election or continuing the party movement.
and this isn't because I'm a political operative and I'm trying to get one person elected or not, because I go with the exact same message over to conservatives and I say, listen, like, there's this new political free agent which could really form a unassailable political coalition that you have here, but you got the rural votes, you got the suburban votes. Man, if you get the blue collar votes, like, it's going to be hard to get knocked out of power. Again, I'm not partisan here, but I'm just free advice, right? In Ontario anyway, with a booming nuclear sector, which it's really hard to understand the kind of economic multipliers that we see here, partially as a result of having our own national reactor technology, which we developed here in the province of Ontario.
CANDU was developed there, correct?
Exactly. The entire supply chain is here. If you spend $1 on CANDU Nuclear, you get $1.40 back in GDP growth.
That's awesome.
Right? So compare that especially to like, let's buy some solar panels and wind turbines. Where are those made? Not many made in Europe
not made
anymore.
Here. Yeah, everything's done overseas.
Inflation Reduction Act is trying to, inflate the economy to bring some of it back home. But they've got an unassailable comparative advantage over in China with, dirt cheap labor or slave labor, with, lax environmental conditions, with huge state subsidy in terms of, supporting these vertically integrated companies that very hard to compete with anyway. So do you spend that money over there? Do you spend it here at home? And so, again, talking to the political right, it's like nuclear in Ontario in particular is a kind of, it's super glue that can cement that electoral coalition together for you. Right. So I would offer the same advice to the political left. I do. Right. And so that's been compelling, I think, in terms of showcasing, politically how important nuclear is. And as we move into this moment of, oh man, our power needs are going up. Like, why did we stop building nuclear in the 80s and 90s? Was it 3 Mile Island? I wouldn't say that was the main thing. The biggest, there's a lot of reasons, right? But the biggest, most fundamental thing is you do not spend, $10 billion to add a gigawatt of reliable capacity to a grid if demand's not there. If there's not going to be customers for the kilowatt hours at the back end of that capital intensive project, be it a hydro dam, be it a nuclear plant, you don't build the thing. Right. So you
can ROI to be had.
You can have all the social license in the world. You could have the best nuclear industry, the best project managers, the best craft labor. You could have people writing love letters and holding up "I love nuclear," placards at football games. You do have that now. But if you don't have demand growth, you ain't going to build it.
Get there.
It doesn't make sense.
And it feels like we're in one of those cusp of time right now where the demand signals are so great because of that Industry 3.0 that we talked about. And the numbers I'm hearing is 2 to 2.5x in the next 10 years of capacity factor across the U.S. grid. Anyway, are y'all seeing something similar up there as far as data center growth? Or
yeah, I mean that's. I have some intel that it's a little bit overhyped, but certainly, yeah. I mean, Sam Altman sounds worried. Elon sounds worried. To a degree, some of this is just about creating really great cat videos and really weird porn. I wonder how much of that energy is actually going to go into that. But I think to get serious, I mean, this has also got huge national security implications, right? I mean, in terms of like combined drone warfare, like I'm no military strategist, but it would make sense that, if you want to compete out there in the world, you're going to want to have serious AI capabilities, and those are going to be power hungry. And there's countries that
we're already seeing that happen right now. Look at what's going on over in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait with the Houthis and the drone swarms in Iran. And it's one of those things I saw it kind of coming to fruition back, from a tactical standpoint and perspective. I'm like, man, this is really, really going to change the landscape. If you inundate the skies with 1 million drones, now you can't conduct flight ops, you can't take them down. So it is very interesting to see where warfare is going. And to your point, you definitely need the AI to back that up to run simultaneous coordinated attacks, et cetera.
So in any case, I mean, do I think that demand growth is sitting in the future? You can never say anything 100% for sure. We could have some horrible global economic crisis. I don't know. Like, I'm straying out of my waters here, but let's say the Israel-Iran thing pops up, the Straits of Hormuz get, blockaded by, oil tanks getting sunk, and price of oil goes up $200 a barrel, and global supply chains kind of come untethered. Like we could be in for some major shit.
Absolutely. Agreed.
And we have this, I love this cognitive bias. There's all kinds of cognitive biases, but one is the extrapolation bias, right? Like human beings, if we're in a linear sort of growth phase, or we're any kind of if we're in an exponential growth phase, we assume that we're going to follow the same kind of pattern, right? And so we could see some black swans, we could see some different kind of events. But yes, to not philosophize too much on your question, I think we got a lot of demand growth coming, which is an indicator to build nuclear. Now, does the U.S. need to build nuclear with natural gas cheaper than water? It's a nice to have. It's not necessarily a need to have, right? And so that's where I think I'm not necessarily as bullish as I'd like to be on nuclear in the U.S. I'm pretty bullish here in Ontario because we don't got coal, we don't have gas.
Right.
We can import pretty cheap gas from you guys, but the question is going to be: is climate, a significant enough driver to do something that's not nice to do, but that's hard to do?
Right. If it doesn't make sense from a P&L perspective to bring that online with the LNG resources that we have,
and you can make it make sense with the IRA, right? There's crazy investment in production tax credits. Is that politically going to hold up? Is a Trump administration coming in? Within, I guess it won't be till January, but we'll see when that gets adjudicated.
And I'm even looking at some of the incentivization that goes on in the green side of things with just the solar and the wind, and a lot of that, and we're starting to see that, or at least I'm seeing the shift, the front side of the shift kind of coming. We're starting to lean away from some of that stuff, and it's starting to get pushback. And a lot of that was so heavily incentivized with subsidies. So we'll see how it goes. And again, it's whether or not the movement and enough belief is founded on climate change. And we're not there yet. I mean, there's naysayers on both sides. And it's when I'm kind of a centrist. I haven't done enough research to make an intelligent, informed decision on it. But it's one of those things. It's going to be curious to see where we go. And then we're looking at, record levels of national debt and things like that. And that's going to have an impact on the abilities to do it and the stability of the country and things like that. But to your point, I can definitely see us sans climate agenda of any kind or trying to drive towards that. We have the natural resources here. So if we're able to drill for it and do all those things and do it for cheap, it seems like it would benefit the economy from that perspective. Mm-hmm. And I would love to see a mix, maybe not a full in, like to your point, I'm a realist on some of this stuff. The ideologies on the right and left aren't going to get you on, you're not going to go 100% full in. You're just not going to get that level of buy-in from the government, no matter what you do, without risking your constituency. So to me, a good hybrid mix just seems like it would make a lot of sense.
I think it does. And of course, there's, broader questions in terms of, international diplomacy. I mean, Russia and China are absolutely eating the U.S.'s lunch in terms of nuclear reactor exports. Those are really, really strong diplomatic tools. I mean, you have an 80 to 100-year relationship cemented in there. Rosatom comes in, finances your build. Maybe it's a build, own, operate. They handle your waste. You are tied in to a significant diplomatic and economic relationship with Russia for 100 years.
Absolutely.
And the U.S. is ceding ground all over the place on that. It's funny because like a lot of the impetus for nuclear in the U.S. is with that rationale in place, but yet the U.S. can't build at home. No. And, Vogtle was a struggle. There's lots of reasons why, more AP1000s in the U.S., there's basically no way in hell they could go as wrong as Vogtle did. And we have a whole, if your listeners are interested in that, they can come over to Decouple and deep dive that. We've got a 3-part miniseries on that.
I'll check that one out. It's pretty interesting, just cost overruns and all that. What do you think was the core issue with Vogtle, in your opinion? I'm kind of curious because I've done a little bit of due diligence on the side, but to me, it seems like we did have that large skilled labor gap that kind of came in. There were cost overruns, material selection, and trying to source, the materials to get it done because of all the regulatory hurdles that are required to jump, into the nuclear space in general. A lot of people don't realize the porosity of the concrete has to be X, Y, and Z, and the steel has to be manufactured to a certain purity or whatever it may be on that. There's a lot of those kind of things that go into the creation of nuclear, if I'm not off base there.
Yeah, I mean, what is fascinating, and this is my guest, James Krellenstein, who points this out. I mean, like you mentioned, there's a whole variety of questions there, a stagnated workforce and project management, just not having built anything like this for 30 years, Absolutely. Regulatory issues. But we do have this case-controlled study of China building AP1000s essentially simultaneously. They got started a couple of years before the U.S. and finishing on a very similar timeline. It took the Chinese 9.5 years to build their AP1000s. It took the U.S. just over 10. China wrapped them up before COVID hit, so COVID had an impact. So how on earth does China, which has been minting out nuclear plants, I think the median build time is under 6 years, why did they have such a slog of it as well? Is that the AP1000 is a terrible design? No, it's that the design wasn't finished. And so there was all sorts of amendments and changes that were having to be made constantly. And that's why in both countries, despite radically different facts on the ground and a humming supply chain and amazing craft labor resources and project management resources in China, it took almost as long.
That's interesting. Now, were they saying the actual reactor wasn't a complete design?
I mean, all sorts of things,
Okay.
right? Like, and it has to do with the nuclear steam supply system, the balance of plant, et cetera. But yeah, the drawings just weren't in. The work packages couldn't be organized appropriately.
Gotcha.
There's all sorts of great little anecdotes as well along the way, that we deep dive. But fundamentally, yeah. And that design is now finalized. There's, built reference plant. AP1000s are operating beautifully in China and the US. China's building, I think they've got another 20 in the pipeline. So this is,
that's impressive.
This was
so
like,
that's another 20 gigs of capacity factor. I believe those are rated at right at a gigawatt per AP1000.
Yeah, 1,100 megawatts.
Yeah.
They can run sort of 93% capacity factor. So
yeah, which is another fantastic benefit. Like the capacity, running at such an exceptionally high capacity factor, that's hard to beat in any other generation modality that's out there. So it's impressive.
For sure. Yeah. So I forget what tangent we were on there, my friend, but we talked politics. I'll let you do the hosty thing.
No, you're good. And so kind of getting back to the political advocacy, that's kind of what we were talking on was, just basically in summation, I don't think we're ever going to be able to convince 100% of the people that it's a good thing to have, but you can definitely turn those little dials within the system to kind of make things happen and kind of influence outcomes, if you will. And kind of along that same guys there, what was the most impactful thing you think you did for your advocacy for the nuclear side?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's to bring back to kind of some of those medical metaphors. I spent a lot of time before emergency medicine. I did a sort of a more general practitioner training, and I ended up doing a lot of palliative care as a result of that. Spent a lot of time like at people's deathbeds, and doing some philosophizing, right? Beyond just the medicine. That's a big part of the kind of care you provide at end of life. And, a big question comes up, on your deathbed, what are your regrets? What do you wish you'd done more of? What do you wish you'd done less of? And people generally say, man, I was over-focused on my career, on the small stuff and fluffing my ego. I should have been there more with my kids. I should have had a better relationship with my wife, whatever else, right? And so I asked myself that question because here I am with these absolute, obsessive focuses that do take me away from things I should probably be putting more attention into. And yeah, when I think about, was this worth anything? Like, has this just been kind of fluffing my intellectual feathers and, having fun conversations with cool people like yourselves? We led a total long shot campaign to save one of our big 3 nuclear generating stations up here, 3,200 megawatt station called Pickering.
Yeah,
8 Pickering reactors built in the 70s and 80s, and 6 had been operating up until just took one offline a month ago. But in any case, plan was to decommission the entire plant and replace it with natural gas, which for a variety of reasons didn't make a ton of sense. But, the facts on the ground were that there wasn't a lot of demand growth and, it's a big capital investment and it's easier just to, amortize costs and just burn, not expensive fuel, but burn natural gas and not do a visionary thing. And so we led this totally long shot campaign. We were discouraged by the nuclear industry itself. They told us to shut up, go away. This isn't good for the industry.
Did they give you any insights as to why it wouldn't be? Because it seems it would be.
No. In typical nuclear industry fashion, very weak on the comms and on the persuasiveness of just the decision's been weighed, go away. And this is coming from like the major trade organizations, the utility, the supply chain organization that would stand to make 10 plus billion doing the refurbishment work to get this plant going for another 10 years. So truly bizarre misincentives and things like that. Unions, they're like, listen, lovely idea. Of course, we want this plant to keep operating. There's 3,200 direct union jobs at the plant, but we've given up. Like, we know it's not happening. And we said, well, we don't have I guess we have the luxury of being an advocacy organization that doesn't take money from industry. We can do whatever the hell we want.
Absolutely.
We think this is morally the right thing to do. So we launched a campaign. A lot of social media presence, but we created a really beautiful, well-researched, well-informed policy report. Due to some, like there's one union that was kind of believers, and were willing to take a long shot. So they helped us get this report into the hand of the premier and the ministers in effect. And ultimately we saved the station. And it's now under plan for refurbishment. And so we're going to see those jobs maintained. And it's just a massive turnaround. And, being at the station on those announcements and seeing the workers and kind of pepping their step, thinking, man, I've got a job. My kids have a job now, right? I mean, these are intergenerational employers, high quality work. And, just to give you a sense again of what a lost cause it was, I was at a Nuclear Association conference up in Canada. And I like bullshitting guys, right? So I went up to this one booth and I said, "Hey, did you hear what they just announced over in the main auditorium?" And the guy goes, "What?" They said they're going to refurbish Pickering. And he said, "Keefer, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Yeah, you got me, right?" And I was like, "But I'll tell you what, I'll make you a bet. I can bet you $1,000 right now that we're going to get this plant refurbished." And he was just laughing at me, right?
That's fantastic.
And he's like, "Done in a second." I'm like, "Well, here's the thing. I want 100 to 1 odds." He's like, "Done, no problem, no
Did he
problem."
pay?
Guess who? Guess who owes? Guess who the bugger is who owes me $100,000? And he's putting some. Let's just say he's putting some new conditions on that bet.
Oh, I bet he is.
So that's sort of the great accomplishment. But I mean, in general, we've seen just a massive turnaround here. Nuclear was listed kind of as a sin stock, excluded from our green finance mechanisms alongside tobacco, gambling, firearms.
Right.
You know, it wasn't quite traffic in exotic species and stuff like that, but it was kind of listed as a bad boy stock. We really riled up the nuclear sector itself. There's 89,000 people working in the sector. Again, these are industries and jobs that really feed communities.
Absolutely.
Politicians pay attention, and you know, when you communicate to them, "Hey, this is what your government thinks of you," right? And I got nothing against if you make cigarettes or you make whiskey or alcohol, whatever. I'm not trying to say that's you should be denounced for working in that profession, but when you're kind of trying to slag on the nuclear industry in that regard, I think it pissed a lot of guys off working in the industry.
As
and we
it
got
should.
tens of thousands of signatures on the petition. Got it in front of. We have a cool mechanism here in Canada where if you get a sponsoring MP and enough signatures, they read your petition out on the floor of the House.
Oh, very cool.
And the government is mandated to give you a written response.
Really? That's fan. We need some of that down here as well. They may have something similar, but I'm not familiar with it. So.
I think it's kind of like a Westminster British Commonwealth thing. But man, is that an effective tool to also
beautiful.
get up there, get some media, get some face-to-face with politicians. And again, I just walked into kind of the right place at the right time and was the right person to have an outsized impact in terms of that sort of lobbying side of things. So yeah, lots of just transformational stuff that's enabling the industry now in terms of financing, et cetera. And here we are. So we're poised in Ontario to add another 6,000 megawatts of nuclear to our fleet. We're looking at 4,800 megawatts of large nuclear up at the Bruce Nuclear Generating Station, which many people don't know. I know in Texas, you're number one in a lot of stuff. Everything's bigger in Texas. Well, we have the largest operating nuclear station in the world up in Canada. We're going to be hitting 7,000 megawatts out of that bad boy with some uprates, I think end of decade, and then adding almost 5 more gigawatts to that.
Wow.
So we'll have
now,
potentially
what is the difference between the
megawatt
CANDU
station.
and the AP1000 as far as output? Is it CANDU capable of putting out more than the gigawatt?
So I mean, just like AP1000 used to be the AP600, right?
Right.
That was never built, but that's the design evolution. So as you see, and this is the idiocy of the small modular reactor craze, is that scaling is this universal law in nuclear in terms of driving the economics, right? The big cost drop-offs we've seen have been scaling up an order of magnitude, say between Shippingport and Zion. In 10 years, you went from 100 to 1,000 megawatts. You did it for a reason, saved you a lot of money, made it more economic. And so, the largest CANDUs we have right now are 900 megawatts.
Okay.
And we're working on a 1 gigawatt version right now. There's a kind of open bid going on for that site I mentioned up at Bruce. It's going to be between AP1000 and this updated CANDU. I'm in the CANDU camp, and that's because I'm an economic nationalist. It's our reactor, it's our design, it's our supply chain, it's our jobs, it's our fuel. I think the AP1000 is a fantastic design. Build as many as you like south of the border, but just keep your sticky American. No, I'm just kidding. We're the ones with the sticky maple syrup covered hands. And
great snowboarding. I've been up there, so it's wonderful.
Yeah, good snowboarding. Anyway, we'll really see what happens. And it has made, the industry's been, while we've not been building anything, while there's not been any projects, everyone's been playing real nice and no one will say anything nasty about each other. But man, the knives are out in Canada because there's a serious project in the works and there's serious competition for it. Competition is good. I really look forward to seeing what happens up here. But yeah, I mean, again, just the delta from starting this whole thing in 2018.
It's just fantastic.
And to think
it's literally been since 2018. So you're on a 6-year timeline that you've been able to really show. And it's just taking the initial action and getting out there and kind of rocking and roll with it. And it's amazing to have that level of impact. And one of the things I wanted to kind of talk through as well is we mentioned the importance. These things are obviously very, very, very expensive to get off the ground. And we had mentioned the government involvement in that from a funding perspective, like all the like the Hoover Dam projects, all these massive CapEx projects. What are you guys seeing as far as the relationship between the government up there in the sector? How is that constructed, I guess, or what does that look like? Is it majority government involved with a private component to it, or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, so certainly historically, all of our nuclear sites are publicly owned and have been publicly financed and backstopped, by government. I mean, we had a big regulated monopoly, publicly owned utility, Ontario Hydro, that, in cooperation with a federal state-owned enterprise, or what we call Crown Corporation up here, delivered, the big units here in Ontario. We've had some degree of deregulation. And so we're actually kind of spinning our wheels trying to figure out exactly how it's all going to work out. But there's no doubt that there's going to be government backstop for this project to de-risk and bring in lower cost capital to make it happen. I'd be lying if I said I had all the specifics. I'm not sure that anyone does at this point.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, and this was the idea again with the SMR craze was, okay, nuclear is really unpopular. Fukushima happened. There's no demand growth. Government will never backstop or get involved in financing nuclear. So we've got to, make it real small so that we can deliver projects just like a natural gas plant, maybe $1 billion. And the only way to do that is to go small. And just the economics just don't work. They don't scale that in that direction. There's a whole bunch of fixed costs with nuclear, and you can minimize those by going big. So it's almost like laughable. I feel like I've got to make this argument, but the nuclear industry went hog wild on this hype train. Got high on their own supply, drank way too much of their own Kool-Aid, and they've done themselves an enormous disservice because a lot of governments followed step with that. And you'll see things like Governor Pritzker in Illinois lifting the nuclear ban, but only if the plants are less than 300 megawatts. The Advance Act that just went through Congress, provides some discounted NRC services and other things, but only for small modular advanced reactors.
Yep.
And what makes sense in nuclear? I am just this. I don't think it should be a controversial opinion, but I don't think you can build nuclear at 300, 400 megawatt size.
It's just not.
If you want to pay a big cost premium, there's nothing preventing you. We know the technology works at that scale, but economically, if you want the cheapest, per installed megawatt and per megawatt hour, you go big.
Right.
There's no way around it.
And I mean, if you think about it, SMR sounds sexy, right? Like we have this ability to mass produce things in these various factories and ship them out for installation and everything without really giving some thought. And I was on the SMR wagon, but much like you, I'm willing to kind of backstep and then, reevaluate the situation. And it was on the Decouple Podcast when I started, not realizing how much infrastructure and cooling pools and the requirements to make them impenetrable by an aviation accident and all the other things that go into it. It's the ancillary equipment required to support it that doesn't really make it as cost effective. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah. I mean, one of the big things, because I think we have been a civilization that's been not putting a lot of shovels in ground recently, compared certainly to, our ancestors, right? I mean, constructing the U.S. interstate, whatever, like massive infrastructure works. I mean, China's, deep in that stuff right now. Like nations that are building up their infrastructure, they know what it is to, lay concrete and put rebar in and things like that. And so when we think about nuclear, I think in the last 10, 15 years, we're just thinking about this nuclear steam supply system and what crazy coolants can we use liquid metals to cool this thing?
Thorium or molten salt.
Yeah, that's cool. That's what looks good in a PowerPoint presentation. You don't like look at complicated diagrams of like earth excavation and laying mud mats and different kinds of fill you can put in to get seismic category 1 buildings in place. But that stuff is a major cost driver, and it does not scale down with these 300 megawatt size reactors. You lose way more power output than you do in terms of the scaling down of that cost driver. And so, I mean, what a testament to the power of language, though. It's almost like words are magical.
Oh, right? They're beautiful.
Renewables. What a magical word. What it evokes in the general public. Wind turbines, they're not even machines. They just sprout from the landscape, right? They're natural. It's a farm. It's a biological organism. It is the wind. It is the sun.
They do call them solar and wind farms. That's fantastic.
And then we have the small modular reactor, also like an invocation, a magical word, right?
Absolutely.
Modular. I mean, there's nothing like the AP1000 is a modular reactor.
Right.
The 1,300 megawatt advanced boiling water reactor built in Japan in record time,
Modular
in
reactor.
under 4 years, a
Right.
very modular reactor. So there's nothing unique to being small that makes you modular.
Right.
But there's this idea that unfortunately a lot of policymakers have been convinced by, and it's the nuclear industry's own damn fault, is that, hey, we're going to build it in a factory like Lego. We're going to ship it to your site, snap it together, whoop-de-doop, there it's done. Nuclear.
I drank the Kool-Aid, so I know.
you know. But then it made you a little sick, and you got a hangover the next day. But now you're anyway. So yeah, I mean, it's obviously so much more we could talk about, Micah. But I think that's a pretty decent survey of kind of what's going on in Canada.
And we are almost at an hour here, and I know you've got a hard stop here. So what's next for Chris Keefer?
Oh man, yeah. Good question. I mean, I'm really proud of Decouple. It's come a long way. Again, it's kind of like the story with Canadian Nuclear Energy, just making some pamphlets and going out to a town square and then meeting with the senior federal and provincial leadership and having major impact on policy decisions here in Canada. The podcast as well. I mean, this was just, I was lonely, COVID lockdown, no one to talk to. I did some college radio when I was younger, and the fact that you could just read a great book and call up an author and there's a decent chance they'd spend an hour talking to you, I was like, this is cool. Let's try it again.
It's fantastic.
So that's how Decouple started. And then again, because it's a really niche, interesting area, and I think I've been able to bring a decent perspective to it, like an outsider
perspective. I'll shout it from the mountaintops to the guest here when you hear this. Check out the Decouple podcast. If you have any interest in anything nuclear, you'll learn
in
tons.
anything at all.
Anything nuclear or the world.
It's funny. I started the podcast right after my divorce, and so people heard Decouple, and they were like, is this a relationship advice podcast? And I'm like, I am utterly unqualified to give relationship advice. So, it's gone on to become very influential, and, it's listened to avidly in the White House and the DOE by industry titans, not just in nuclear, folks at ExxonMobil, Google. I mean, there's a lot of interest in nuclear from a lot of different people.
Absolutely. And
what we're able to do, the nuclear industry itself is, this is hyperbolic language, but it's kind of, they have a North Korean-esque communications culture. There's a party line. You do not stray from it, you will lose your job. There's a lot of people who are brilliant, who have a lot of heterodox ideas. Those ideas don't have anywhere to go. Nope. So they come to Decouple. Right. And amazingly, we've only had one or two anonymous guests. We've had to hide their voices.
Really?
But in general,
I haven't seen those. That's why.
For some crazy reason, I seem to be able to find really, really like gobsmackingly intelligent people who can run their mouths, and speak truth to power, speak truth to nuclear power. And as a result, that creates a really, I was going to say explosive mix, but yeah, it's captured the attention of some really prominent decision makers, and so that's highly rewarding. And just to see the impact it's had and the way it's the steered policy, and for instance the most recent pathways to commercial liftoff from the DOE really has I think drawn heavily from the kind of culture and the voices I've been able to elevate through the podcast. So amazing. I think I'll keep going on that, and the Substack's going well now, and starting to actually just do some written pieces there and having a lot of fun with that. So.
And where can, if our guests want to kind of tune in, where can they find you most easily? You said Substack. Do you have a Substack?
Yeah, Substack. Just look Decouple Media on Substack, and then subscribe, pledge, share, all that jazz. YouTube is a good one as well. That's where we get a lot of our listens. In the comment sections, people say we're a criminally undersubscribed account. I tend to agree with that assessment. So if you could ring the bell and sign up for annoying notifications and subscribe, that would be great as well.
Love it. And again, thank you so much for your time. And I just think it's amazing what you've been able to accomplish as one man, and hopefully it's inspirational to many of our guests to get out there. I'm big. You've actually kind of given me reason to kind of drive more to the nuclear advocacy side, hence having you on our power podcast. Obviously, it's very relevant, right? But we're technically your PNC apparatus substation distribution bubbas over here. But I just find it truly fascinating, and what is the impacts it can have to society writ large across the globe if we were to able to kind of make this the go-to power generation. Obviously not getting rid of oil or gas, petroleum products. I think we need those. We're not going to have clothes to wear and cups to drink out of and things like that. But truly impactful stuff, Chris. And again, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to hop on with us. And I look forward to learning more. I'm going to stay tuned in. Like I said, you're my outlet into the world of nuclear. In additional studies, I still follow what's going on at TerraPower and NuScale and some of those other folks for U.S. But kudos to you and everything you've been able to accomplish. And I, again, appreciate you taking the time to chat with me.
Right on, Mike. It's been a pleasure, man.
Absolutely.
Good
Until next time, folks, Mike out.
Cheers.